This is Eric Hanselman. I'm Chief Analyst for 451 Research, and I'm here at the 451 Hosting and Cloud Transformation Summit. Thanks for joining us. My guest today is Aneesh Chopra, the former and first Chief Technology Officer for the US. Aneesh, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We've been talking about all sorts of odds and ends of things over the course of the HCTS environment,
Yes.
taking a look at new and different technologies. You've just given us some great view about the role of the government in innovation.
Yes.
A strong role to play, a lot of opportunities. What are the highlights about that?
So it's a strong role, but with a lowercase g. And I want to spend a moment on that to make sure that we understand the context, because historically, the role of government has been seen either as a buyer of services, and the government spends nearly $80 billion on IT services. So as a customer, we have a voice, right? So that's a role, buyer. We're a regulator. We regulate different pieces and parts. Not a direct regulator when it comes to the full cloud services ecosystem, but indirectly as we think about privacy and security in certain regulated sectors of the economy. So verticals have very specific rules about how a healthcare service goes to the cloud and the like. But we're also a supplier of data. I often said that if you were to, my successor says it better than I do, so I'll use his, Todd Park. He said, the Saudi Arabia of data is the US federal government. And so if you were to believe that the opening up of data would be an important source to enable a number of mashups and analytics and actionable services that can be meant to help people live better lives, then, well, we could play many roles. And I think the ideal role is the collaborative role, where we work together with industry. We make investments where we should, infrastructure. We set rules of the road with industry so we can together tackle some of the privacy and security issues, so we're not one company and one customer have to negotiate. We should all kind of tackle some of these issues. And then we should do as much as we can to make more data open, regulated industries, government-held data, and even questions about just societally, what more information can we use to make our society a better place? All of that is a lowercase g role of government, and it can be stronger.
So that role of innovation, if I can extend your metaphor, you pull in refiners and drillers and all those folks who can start to bring it up to the surface and turn it into something.
Yes.
Is that something where government has a long-term ownership of that data?
No.
Or custodian?
It's a great question. I think well, at least in the policy of President Obama where I served, we made the judgment that the default setting in government would be from government held and private to publicly accessible and open. And frankly, open is defined as machine readable, so we clearly have a notion that applications should be able to plug into this public infrastructure and use it in all kinds of creative ways with limited intellectual property constraint. That's the philosophy. Obviously, each individual data set and agency is going to have their specific rules, but philosophically, we flipped the switch. But there's also R&D to invest in to foster even more new tools and the use of those tools to solve big problems. And there's also this idea that we need to potentially think about a regulatory framework. So what do we do in a world where we can now figure out exactly where you are at all hours of the day? Remember the God view at Uber, right?
Absolutely.
We have questions that we hadn't thought we had to tackle as we think about these new technologies.
Well, suddenly those implications of data really start to expand into a bunch of different things. I mean, we're always fond of saying that technology outpaces society's ability to deal with all of its implications and consequences. Data seems to be one of those areas that if we start thinking about the consequences, we always seem to be maybe a step behind. One of the things we've kicked around a lot here, of course a hot topic in technology in general, and a source of a lot of data, is the Internet of Things.
Absolutely.
And we start thinking about lots of data and social implications. IoT opens a lot of doors on that front. Go ahead.
Not only do I agree with you, it's a great case study for this stronger but lowercase g role of government. So we don't have the cool IoT moniker in our agencies, but during my tenure when we oversaw the R&D portfolio for IT investments, we put a lot of money into what's called cyber physical systems. That's the precursor to IoT. It basically says, how can you digitally enable physical things, okay? A road, your home, and your car, or whatever. And so now we call this IoT, And frankly, the even cooler kids think of this as smarter cities and an infrastructure for an urban economy and an increasingly urban economy. So we are investing in infrastructure. Tooling for cyber-physical systems is a core tenet of both DARPA and the National Science Foundation, heavy investors. We clearly need to figure out the regulatory world because of the intersection of this sensitive data about our privacy and to keep us secure. And then last but certainly not least, we have a lot of data that we believe as a government we should regulate be made open. So we've regulated that smart grid data, if it's to consumers, they should be able to access their real-time energy data. So if they want to connect it to an IoT device in their home that can auto-program the fridge or the thermostat to adjust because of some energy incentive that is available through their demand response program, well then the meter should be able to connect to that IoT device in the home without friction. Without friction, my friend.
Well, that gets us to that whole issue of data ownership.
Yes.
I mean, globally, there are a lot of different ideas and expectations about who owns that data.
Yes.
That's sort of opening up of that kind of consumer data.
To consumers is a bedrock principle in almost every society.
Well, but I think on ours, we've been a little more open in terms of privacy in the States, in terms of other places. Is that something where we start to extend that into the data that gets built out of it? Or is that something that we sort of think about as primarily consumer control? Or?
So wow, this is a very hot topic. Control, access, ownership often get commingled. And there's a lot of gray area on ownership because as a consent to access a service, part of the deal is the service is offering you something in value and you have essentially authorized the service to take economic advantage of the information that they've made available to you. You signed a contract. So ownership is slightly different. Access and control are even more interesting. In our healthcare system, we've been grappling with the issue of how do you make sure that your medical records, when you see Dr. Jones and you visit hospital memorial care and you are going to a specialist for a consultation, how do you make sure they're all communicating about you? We've grappled with our society that they should all talk to each other and somehow you've got this magic pen that authorizes everybody to communicate. We couldn't quite figure out how to implement this magic override system for the country. So we said, hey, you know what? APIs allow consumers to authorize your Facebook photos to appear on Twitter or whatever. So why don't we borrow the same logic and authorize the sharing of our medical record? Hey, Memorial Care would like to access Dr. Jones' medical record of yours, would you agree? So now the new regulation says the patient has the right to access their health records and to connect it to any application of their choice to help them make sense of their health data. Who owns the data is a different philosophical question, but at least the consumer has a regulatory right to connect an app to it regardless of the source ownership. So that's an example of how control, ownership, and access are sort of multiple dimensions of this core concept.
So I happen to live in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
That's got a little more advanced data privacy law than
Yeah,
others.
the People's Republic, man, we love Massachusetts. It's great.
Hey, well, the Commonwealth
Has
has
is
seen
Virginia, so we love it. The people.
infinite wisdom.
Yeah.
To be able to apply a whole bunch of prescriptions in terms of how we handle data.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about health records.
Yeah.
Issues around how we handle data isn't a sort of a binary share it all, share or not. Is there a role in government in terms of helping to slice and dice sort of that data and some of the capabilities and how we control it? You know, Massachusetts sort of has got their list of, here's what's personally identifiable, here's what's important to protect. Is that something that extends to the federal government, or is that something that...
It absolutely does in the sectors where it's regulated at the federal level. So we regulate FERPA, the Federal Educational Records, so basically a student whose educational records are stored in a database. There are limitations on what that data provider can do under contract to the school system. Health records are regulated at the federal level, but utility records are regulated at the state level. But here's the common theme. In almost every level of government, the rules are often written on B2B transactions. If you wish to share information about Aneesh with 3 other folks, here's what's safe to share without Aneesh's permission. Here's where you need Aneesh's consent and what that looks like. And here's the gray area where you can in certain circumstances. And every state takes those parameters and tweaks the knobs and dials to be a little bit either more permissive or more constraining. But in every state, if the consumer takes possession of the data, the regulations on what to do with it immediately fall off. As a parent of 3 children, if I get my child's soft copy of their educational records, but I choose to share that soft copy with the Khan Academy to personalize videos for my kids to get supplemental training, there's no relationship between the school district that wrote the transcripts and so forth and Khan Academy because I mediated that flow.
And you got the control and presumably at that point, the ownership.
So now the question is, if the Khan Academy wanted to connect to the school district's API, now the lawyers are saying, well, wait a minute, maybe the consumer fused the connection with an OAuth transaction, to be nerdy for our friends who are nerdy, but did it really mean for that to happen? And how do we know that it was in fact Aneesh who pushed the authorize button for OAuth? And so you get into all kinds of related questions when you have a direct API. But physical possession via download and upload, no question.
Keep it simple. So you talked about some of the limitations. It seems like that's one of the challenges as a federal CEO.
Yes.
That you're dealing with what the federal government can control and what the states are taking care of.
Nudging, convening, and collaborating was a big part of the role. So when we offered the president's strategy for the smart grid, we could not say, thou shalt do this at the state level. We said, we'll establish a best practices institute. If you wish to call, they'll give you advice on this, this, and this, and they might say that. So it created more of an opt-in, collaborative, and when we did I shared a case study that it took 90 days for a small group of CIOs, the PG&E CIO, Karen Austin, whom I think is just a phenomenal leader, stepped to the plate and said, I want to make this happen. I'm going to give my customers the ability to download their energy meter data, smart meter data, and do with it what they wish. The regulator basically was like, okay. The Fed said, can we help you work on the technical standards so the way you implement this can be shared amongst everybody? So she published the standards in 90 days. Our agency, the Commerce Department, published the underlying specs and made it voluntary. 60 million Americans today have utility companies that are rolling out smart meters committed to using the same spec. Congress didn't have to mandate. The states didn't have to get trumped in their rulemaking. Everybody's kind of looking and working in a voluntary matter, and it just works. In the digital era, you can reach, as my friends in the internet economy would say, rough consensus, running code.
Running code wins, right?
Running code, rough consensus, running code.
With the federal government as the promulgator.
As a convener nudger. Promulgator implies we do the authoring.
Good point.
We are the convener and author and convener and nudger, while the private sector does the authoring.
The concept of a federal nudge is just an awesome idea.
Yes.
And one of the things that we've been also kicking around here, sort of pulling it back to some of the technologies that we're very specifically interested in, cloudy capabilities.
Yes.
There's that federal nudge that moved forward cloud standards. I know we were going back and forth. There's been a lot of chat on Twitter about what's happening here at the summit.
Correct.
And at a lot of the conversation. So why don't you lead in with federal standards for cloud?
Yeah, so in the world circa 2008, when the president was elected, we came into office, each federal agency had their own definition for what it is that they were doing on the infrastructure side. And I would say 20 plus billion of the 80 plus billion was infrastructure. So heavy infrastructure spend. But we didn't have an inventory of data centers. We didn't know what applications were riding in what circumstances, what was considered cloud. So we came up with a framework for a cloud-first model as a policy. My colleague, the CIO, Vivek Kundra, executed a very strong kind of action plan, if you will, that the agencies had to follow. But in the government, the agencies are independently funded by Congress, so they can actually have the ultimate check writing as to what they do. So we had to do nudging within the government to drive them towards some common standards to say, look, if you're going to buy cloud, let's have a common services catalog.
Is that the executive order nudge that goes into play
there? Well,
the
executive order might be thou shalt open up your data, that's a policy we can control. It's not an executive order nudge to say thou shalt be cloud. It's a directive from OMB. Has a slightly different power than the president's, signature. So we were able to say in the budgeting process, we're going to honor those who take on this cloud responsibility. But to your point, and the reason why we had Twitter traffic today was we're trying to find Goldilocks. We want to have a high bar that meets the security and privacy requirements of enough agencies that feel like they've got sensitive information they want protected. And so we didn't want to dumb down the standards, but we didn't want to set everybody to the highest, but these go to 11, if you remember from that Spinal Tap. So we had to get Goldilocks to say what's enough. We had to get the industry to help us define those standards. And the best part about it is we had commercial carriers that didn't have a lot of government business agree to make the millions of dollars of investments to upgrade their services offerings so that they could compete head to head. And some of the famous examples, when the CIA wrote that $700 million contract with Amazon to be kind of an early adopter on this new infrastructure, it was a shot heard around the agencies as an example. And that discussion on Twitter was, did we do too much, too little? Has it resulted in revenue flowing to cloud service providers? Is it enough? Should it be more? And that's a healthy debate we should be having in our society.
Well, but as somebody who was involved in a lot of that agency acquisition process in the pre-FedRAMP days,
yes,
from a personal opinion, it's something that certainly as a first step, open the doors. If we're paving highways to extend the general idea, it moved us forward.
Thank you for saying that.
And especially in terms of sort of where we've gone, in terms of getting to a point of at least standardizing or regularizing that problem, not going to sort of full-blown standards. It's meant that we've got a set of expectations that providers know and can count on as they go into that process.
That's exactly right. And we should continuously iterate. The cost of compliance should fall, market barriers should fall, competition should rise, prices will come down, taxpayers will save money, we'll put more resources into the big problems of our society, less on overhead, and the world will be a better place.
Well, and making things, we're fond of saying, more frictionless.
That's right.
And encouraging more Spinal Tap references
That's
at the
exactly
same
right.
time.
Exactly right.
So we talked about some of those sort of encouragement efforts.
Yes.
One of the other things we sort of rattled around were ideas around that shift towards smart cities. We think about some of the opportunities that exist there. There's an awful lot that's happening today that's being driven by municipalities and just the need to drive for efficiency. Is that something where we should let that take its own course? Should we be standardizing more? Where does that fit sort of broadly?
We're very frontier right now. So the more localities experiment, run their infrastructures. The way I see this is the ideal role of the government in this moment is the R&D investments to support ideas that the field wants to test. So in Boston, where you said you're from Massachusetts, they had an idea that when they replace the light bulbs on street lamps, they should include a wire that allows them to put, whenever they want to in the future, some smart radio that could span many spectrum frequencies. And they didn't put the radio network on the top, but they simply pre-built the base station and the wiring to the top. So in the future, it'll be dramatically cheaper to put that infrastructure in place when they want to upgrade public safety communications. That's smart. And if there's an R&D effort to do that better, faster, cheaper, if there are grants and other R&D-like instruments that can help underwrite some of that creativity, let mayors be creative. There's no need for the top-down to dictate. And in fact, the president asked his science advisors, which include Eric Schmidt from Google and Craig Mundy from Microsoft, now retired, a variety of other experts, said, give me your best ideas on how we can move a smart cities agenda forward. And I would encourage all of your viewers to read the PCAST Smart Cities report, and it outlines explicitly this sort of R&D roadmap for how the federal government can help be an investor in that early stage for smart city infrastructure, defined by the needs out in the field, because that's really the spirit and where we are right now. Over time, we'll get to standards and more, kind of common models that will be procured. But for now, we're in frontier land.
Well, take a look at that needs first assessment in terms
right.
of where we need to go with technology.
That's right.
And start to bring that together.
That's the idea.
Seems like that starts to now sort of circle back to, for us here, thoughts about how do we build supporting infrastructure to be able to manage
Absolutely.
it and all those pieces. Those seem to be areas in which there's enough activity to drive a lot of that innovation. Here, if we think about infrastructure for cloud capabilities, you look at NASA's funding for OpenStack.
Yes.
And a lot of those pieces and initiatives.
I referenced that earlier today.
Absolutely. It's put together a
You
whole
liked
range
OpenStack? I didn't hear your reaction to it.
Oh, absolutely. We're big fans of OpenStack. We see a ton of it all over. And in terms of an open collaborative effort, to be able to now take what started out as that really fundamental research project and now build out of it what is this open source community that has brought together the capacity to build industrial scale cloud out of what are a set of code repositories that are free and open to the development community around it.
And the best part from my perspective was that a capital G or a lowercase g involvement? I would argue lower, because what had happened was we didn't put our thumb on the scale from a procurement standpoint. We didn't say, thou shalt only buy this. What we said was NASA, the agency, was interested in having some competition and wanted to contribute its own code base towards the cause. And that agency wanted to join hands as an equal member of an open society, not a dictator, not a heavy Uncle Sam role. Certainly we gave them shout outs and air cover to give it a shot and make a difference, but we didn't do anything to adjust the market to say somehow that means your preferential treatment on procurement or you get better regulatory process. So even though we were helping to foster the open community, we didn't go that far. We try to strike that balance, and I think that is critical to understand. Stronger role of government, capital G or lowercase g. This is a lowercase g example.
Well, and the capital M markets have picked up with it and run with it.
That's right.
So
let the markets decide, have some viable options available. As you know, this is a big conversation in the cloud community, and so all that's to the good.
Very definitely. So anything that struck your fancy from an innovation perspective here at the summit?
Well, I was impressed by the speed with which the infrastructure is allowing us to have unbelievable computing power in the cloud, on demand. And that is, innovation often requires any of a number of dimensions. One is new tools come to life, and you can use those tools in all kinds of ways you hadn't imagined because they weren't around before. And today we saw some interesting tools. Another way is the rules of a particular industry are changing. Healthcare is moving from rewarding doctors and hospitals from cha-ching every visit to balancing out the needs for the patient kind of over a budgeting year. And so that means there's a whole new set of capabilities, tech-enabled, that are going to be part of our care delivery system. So run to where the Gretzky puck is heading, as they say. So innovation thrives when the rules change and the legacy guys take forever to get there and the new guys come up and they make it happen, or gals. And then a third dimension is that you just have this serendipity of I solved a problem in sector A and I want to bring that answer to sector B. And I think a lot of the conference chatter, people that are coming from different industry verticals are benefiting from, how did you use this infrastructure in your way? I'm going to use it in mine. And that also brings about some innovation. So in all dimensions, it's a good platform for conversation.
Well, that's one of those things that we try to do here at the Hosting and Cloud Transformation Summit. Hopefully bring people together, get some interesting conversations going, and talk about where innovation can take us.
Yes.
And I appreciate all your perspectives today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks very much. And we hope that you'll tune in tomorrow for day 2 of Hosting and Cloud Transformation Summit here in scenic Las Vegas. This is Eric Hanselman. Thank you very much.